American Corruption 101 is the fact that Joe Manchin was about to put forward this like side deal in um the Senate essentially. And based on what it had from Bloomberg government, it had the letterhead from API or the American Petroleum Institute, basically in basically implying that this was a document that Joe Manchin had gotten straight from oil lobbyists to try to use to torpedo the strongest parts of Joe Biden's climate legislation. And Bernie Sanders and a lot of other people caught Joe Manchin on this and called him out on it. This has to do with the Mountain Valley pipeline in West Virginia and whether or not it's built and whether or not West Virginians want it. And just the fact that it is not an uncommon thing for legislation in the United States to be not drafted by legislators, even people who work in their offices, but by think tanks and by corporations and by outwardly corporate influences. And our legislators like Joe Manchin don't even respect us enough to make it look like you didn't copy it. Like, in eighth grade, if I were to hypothetically just copy my friend's work, I wouldn't photocopy it so my handwriting was the same and so my friend's name was in the top right hand corner. I would do the answers myself. I would change the work a little bit. Like, there's methods to this.
You'd make an effort, you got to do something.
Yeah, I almost want our politicians to respect us more if they're gonna lie to us like this.
It is like disrespectful. It's embarrassing. It's mean, But I mean, I feel really bad. I've said this before. I feel really bad for the people of West Virginia who thought that they were electing a Democrat and then they end up with Joe Manchin. Those people wanted a Democrat in office and they wanted Democratic representation. They didn't want a Joe Manchin. They didn't want this pipeline and they didn't want the guy who put it there. So they elected a guy because they were duped. It wasn't their fault. They were tricked. The whole country was tricked, right? Everybody was tricked by this guy. And then he took the election, and now he's doing all these things that these West Virginians don't want. It sucks. It sucks, but maybe it means that next time they'll get a better Democrat to replace him. But we'll see.
Yeah, I want to read the details of this report. So, a side deal between Joe Manchin and Chuck Schumer focused on a permitting overhaul doesn't specifically cite the Mountain Valley pipeline, which appears to conflict with a draft one-page summary deal released this week, which pointed to federal approval of the long-delayed 303-mile natural gas pipeline. Democratic leaders struck the deal in exchange for Manchin's crucial vote on the Inflation Reduction Package, which Joe Manchin got to name, which on the one hand, I think that's smart politics. On the other hand, it's only smart politics if you pass the bill, you market it as the Inflation Reduction Act, and inflation actually gets reduced. I think that's a dicey thing as an economist to say you're going to do something in the economy in month one and have it be felt in 2 months after that. But yeah, if it works, great. If it doesn't, like it isn't right now, it just makes the Democrats look like morons. It makes them look out of touch.
I mean, yeah, whenever you're messing with the economy and whenever you make promises based on the economy, it is always risky. And I always thought it was weird how the performance of the economy is such a factor in elections, right? Whenever we're considering the election, we say, "Oh, the economy was great under this president, and then it was not great under that president." Blah, blah, blah. There's so many factors that go into what makes the economy perform well or not well, and then on top of that, it's cyclical. It goes in waves and circles and whatever. So it's going to be up sometimes, it's going to be down sometimes, and sometimes, a lot of times, most of the time, I'd say the president has very little to do with it, right? There are policies that can influence it, sure, but there's so many other global factors and environmental factors and things that are just unpredictable and out of people's controls, like a global pandemic, for example, that can influence the economy. So it never made sense to me that this is something that we really harp on as far as presidents and elected officials go. But yeah, good. I mean, good for them if it works out, I guess.
Yeah, ultimately this doesn't help with the climate, but I think we're just going to see a lot of these things over the next couple of years where we're weighing between energy needs that are very real and climate and political interests, which is unfair and it sucks, but um
It does
yeah.
suck because, it's not real. Political interests are not like a real thing. It's just a made up thing that we just decide to live our lives based off of. Like American politics or even global
I
politics, that's just human made shit. It's just like our own failure again to communicate with one another and to understand one another. And something like the climate is very real. It has been before us and it will be after us in some form or other. So it's stupid to me that something like American politics at this point in time specifically is going to potentially affect the entire planet in a really, really terrible way.
I want to play a little bit of what Bernie Sanders said about this side deal here. This is via Democracy Now.
Yeah.
carry 2 billion cubic feet of frack
Hold
gas
on.
across more than streams and wetland into Vermont's
The Senate has a
side deal.
In the coming weeks and months, the Senate has a fundamental choice to make. We can listen to the fossil fuel industry and the politicians they pay, who are spending huge amounts of money on lobbying and campaign contributions to pass this dirty side deal. Or we can listen to the scientists and the environmental community who are telling us loudly and clearly to reject this side deal and eliminate the $15 billion in tax breaks and subsidies Congress is already providing to big oil and gas companies each and every year. Mr. President, while the legislative text of this side deal has not been made public, according to a one-page summary that was released last month, this bill would make it easier for the fossil fuel industry to receive permits to complete some of the dirtiest and most polluting oil and gas projects in America. Specifically, this deal would approve the $6.6 billion Mountain Valley Pipeline, a 303-mile frack gas pipeline spanning from West Virginia to Virginia and potentially on to North Carolina. We're talking about a pipeline that would generate emissions equivalent to 37 coal plants or over 27 million cars each and every year. Mr. President, it is hard for me to understand why anyone who is concerned about climate change would consider for 1 second voting to approve a pipeline that would be equivalent to putting 27 million more cars on the road each and every year.
Senator Sanders spoke on the same day as protesters rallied in Washington, D.C. against the Mountain Valley Pipeline. We're joined now by two guests who took.
So yeah, I think once again by Bernie, that was a really good point there. Kind of just breaking down what the law's doing.
Oh, yeah. Well, whenever I see Bernie just up there on a podium addressing Congress or the president, whoever, I always feel bad. Like, I wish Bernie didn't have to work so hard anymore. Like, I wish he could take a break. And I wish that there was someone who could help him. I wish that there was more of a bench for him. I know we have a lot of more progressives, at least in the House. I wish that there was somebody like him in the Senate who was like remotely comparable. I guess there's Liz Warren and like there's a few others, but it's also I feel like he works so hard for so many people and thank God he does because he really is the only one who can actually get a lot of these things through. He's the one who stopped um or he's the one who blocked the thing for the rail workers. And he's the one who like there's so many things that he did specifically, and without Bernie Sanders being there and doing what Bernie Sanders did, things just wouldn't have happened for a lot of people. Like during the pandemic, whenever they were giving away stimulus checks, Bernie was the one who said, make sure you include gig workers in, whenever you're considering who gets a stimulus check, because they're not really registered anywhere else. They don't have regular employment, but they're people. There's a lot of them out there too. And that's me, and it's probably, well, I think, well, that's me at least. So I wouldn't have gotten anything if it wasn't for Bernie Sanders, right? And there's so many things that he does that I wish he just didn't have to do, but he does. So. I think this
Yeah.
is just like a Bernie appreciation moment and wishing I could do more for you, Bernie. That's what it is,
I I think the way at this point we do more for Bernie is like by running for office, which is like I don't think what neither of us
Well, I
signed
don't
up
want to do
for.
that. Yeah. So like anything else.
And that's really what I think what
Yeah.
you were that's really what I think what you're getting to is that Bernie doesn't have much of a bench, and it's
Yeah.
not for lack of trying. Like
I want
there's
someone else to run, not me, is what I'm saying.
there's Justice Democrats, but the Republicans have done a phenomenal job at making the political situation hostile so that none of the Justice Democrats really want, like, AOC is just a like sexual object for major parts of the Republican Party and the Republican electorate.
Yeah.
um Ilhan Omar constantly gets threats and is vilified largely wrongfully for being an anti-Semite. Not true at all. People like Cori Bush, Jamal Bowman, extra racialized stuff comes to them. They've played different times the racial harassment that they've gotten on behalf of people who are in the Republican Party who don't even do the tepid thing John McCain used to do, where they say, "No, no, 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 John Mann, Barack Obama, he's a good man. Don't worry about it. He's not an Arab," which was already a coded terrible phrase to begin with. But you don't even have Republicans who will go like, "Hey, listen, let's chill out the rhetoric. These are people who want to work with politically we just disagree with." No, we have like a this is an existential threat, an existential crisis, and
Yeah.
if we don't kill them all, they are going to kill us first. Is borderline what they're saying, and sometimes exactly what they're saying.
Yeah. And well, I just did a story today for Rebel HQ, and was talking about this guy, a Republican in Utah. He's a Mormon and he's a Republican prosecutor, and he's up for whatever reelection, whatever the race was. And I think a lot of people didn't like him because he was a more progressive Republican, right? So he was a prosecutor, but people said that he was a more liberal prosecutor, meaning that he wasn't as tough on crime as I guess they wanted him to be, right? So what they did, and this is coming out of presumably the Republican Party, the QAnon kind of crowd, they said they told people that him and his wife were murdering and cannibalizing children, who were just murdering and eating children as part of some kind of satanic worship. And the guy ended up losing his race. And then he said, I'm not even going to run again going forward because it's not worth it. So they really are just bullying people out of even the opportunity to serve their communities. Even if people think that they're good for the job, what kind of sane person wants that job and wants to be put under that kind of scrutiny and wants to deal with all of that and wants to deal with being doxxed and being, objectified and having their intelligence questioned all the time and having every one of their moves questioned, right? AOC can't get a haircut without people getting mad at her. So it's not a life that I want, and I don't know anyone who would, or any sane people who I think would. The people that I know who do want to run for office, um, it's a certain personality type. I don't want to generalize too much, but it definitely is like a strong, like alpha male, thinks he can, get a lot done in the office. And maybe they can, right? And maybe that is the kind of people that we need, not necessarily alpha male, but, people who just like kind of don't give a shit about a lot of things and are like, I'm just going to go in and do it. And no one's going to mess with me kind of thing. I'm not that. And they also have to have some kind of level of composure to make it through this whole process. And I don't think I have that either. So